Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am overwhelmed with enthusiasm because this episode features the one and only Kathryn Leigh Scott, and I can't wait for you to hear it. But before we get to the show, I want to tell you about a few things. I have some exciting news. The Rondo Awards are upon us. Voting has begun in the Rondo Hatton Classic Horror Awards, and I'm ecstatic. I'm thrilled to announce that Terror at Collinwood has been nominated for Best Podcast once again. For the last 2 times we were nominated, Terror at Collinwood came in second, first to Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast, and then last year to Mick Garris's Body Parts. And hey, coming in second to Gilbert Gottfried and Mick Garris, that in and of itself is an honor. But hey, maybe third time's the charm. Maybe we'll nab that award this year. That is up to you. The way to vote in the Rondo Awards is via email. You send an email to taraco@aol.com, and that is TARACO@AOL.com. And you can vote in as many or in as few categories as you like. You don't have to vote in every category. It is 1 vote per person, and every email must include your name to be counted. All votes are kept strictly confidential, and no emails or personal information will ever be shared with anyone. You can see the full ballot over at rondoaward.com. And again, you want to send your email with your selections to taraco@aol.com, TARACO@AOL.com by April 16th. And hey, if you want to vote for Terror at Collinwood, all you got to do is type in Best Podcast, Terror at Collinwood, and then you just send it over to the Rondo Awards email. I certainly would appreciate it. No pressure though, because there are so many great podcasts on that list. I wouldn't blame you for voting for any of them. But you can only pick one. This is sort of like the People's Choice Awards for classic horror endeavors and scholarship. So thank you to those who did nominate Terror at Collinwood. And also, Penny Dreadful has been nominated for Favorite Horror Host, which thank you for putting Penny Dreadful on the ballot for Favorite Horror Host. I think that's more of an honorary nomination at this point. We did do our TV show for 10 years, and I'm honored to have won a couple of Rondo Awards for that. I dust off the pointy hat usually around Halloween, and we do a Halloween special or something like that, or convention appearances and things like that. Not as active as I used to. I'm getting up there. I am 700 years old, darling. I'm also thrilled that so many guests who've appeared on this podcast have been nominated for their projects. The list is immense on this list. I have so many people I know on this list who I adore, and I am so happy for them. I can't mention everybody here, but I'm just going to mention those who have been guests on Terror at Collinwood. So just kicking it off here, Todd Tarantula, directed by Ansel Faraj, has been nominated for Best Independent or Streaming Film. For Book of the Year Nonfiction, we have Donald F. Glut with Classic Movie Monsters, Patrick McRae with The Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound, Mark DeWidziak with A Mystery of Mysteries, The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe, Sam Irvin, who will be coming onto the podcast in March for the epic saga behind Frankenstein, The True Story. Under Best Classic Monster Fiction, we have Amanda Desiree, who's been nominated for In the Shadow of the Skull. We have Ricardo Delgado, who wrote and illustrated Dracula of Transylvania. Moving on to Best Article, we have Rod Labby with The High Point of Hagsploitation from Scary Monsters number 132. For Best Cover, we have Mark Maddox with the Freaks cover for Scream number 42. For Best Website, we have Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror and the Collinsport Historical Society. For Best Podcast, not all of these folks have been on the podcast yet, but they are friends of the podcast. I would say B-Movie Cast, Monster Kid Radio, Diecast Movie Podcast, Literary License Podcast, all nominated for Best Podcast alongside Terror at Collinwood. For Favorite Horror Host, again, alongside Penny Dreadful. Several of these horror hosts on this list appeared in the Halloween special I did with the 20 horror hosts talking about Dark Shadows. So we have Dr. Drek, Dr. Sarcophagi, Dr. Gangrene, Count Gordeval, Halloween Jack, Marlena Midnight, Bobby Monster, Sally the Zombie Cheerleader, the Bone Jangler, Carlos Borla. They were all on the episode, the horror host episode to celebrate Dark Shadows. So all of them have also been nominated. So many great folks on here and so many wonderful options. I can't wait to dive into this ballot to vote. I'll put a link in the show notes to the Rondo Awards. In other big news, there is a Dark Shadows Remembrance event coming up, and I believe that is happening July 5th and 6th, but I don't know if that's been set in stone yet, but that's the scuttlebutt I'm seeing on the internet. So don't book any flights yet, but the full information will be coming. Keep your eyes out on social media and on the podcast. I mean, I'm going to be off after this episode for maybe 3 weeks or so. So by the time I come back to the podcast, there will surely be more information by then. They haven't announced all the details yet as of this recording, but Kathryn and I did talk a little bit about it here, and Jim Pearson from the Dark Shadows Festivals, and of course, who handles all of the Dark Shadows licensing, etc., worked for Dan Curtis, and Mary O'Leary, who directed the Jonathan Frid documentary and was Jonathan Frid's business partner and Crohn's Associates. They are spearheading this. They're behind this. So the first evening of the event is a life celebration for Lara Parker, which is a very special thing, and that's going to be happening, I believe, on the Friday evening. And then on the next day, on the Saturday, is the Jonathan Frid centenary. I believe several of the actors will be in attendance or participating in some capacity. This is going to be in Los Angeles, and there is going to be a hotel associated with the event. Like I said, I don't know all of the details yet, but when I have them, I will definitely announce them here. And this is not a festival, but it is certainly a Dark Shadows event, and it's going to be a very important one, it sounds like. So speaking of Dark Shadows cast members, James Storm, who played Gerard Stiles, of course, in Dark Shadows, and his wife, the lovely Valerie Pronio Storm, are photographers, and they are very skilled photographers, multi-talented individuals here. I've picked up a couple of beautiful photographs from their website. You can see them in the YouTube version of this episode. I'll put up a couple of pictures. These photos, they offer great deals. I got a Gerard Stiles signed photo as part of this Dark Shadows deal. So you can find out more at jimstormphotography.com. Amazing photographs. You should definitely check out their website. And hey, maybe you will be hearing from James and Valerie sometime soon. We shall see. In other exciting news, Our Shadowed Past Volume 2 is coming, and you've heard me talk about Our Shadowed Past before. It's a collection of fan memories and beautiful, rare photographs. This one features more amazing fan memories, an abundance of fan memories about discovering Dark Shadows and the role it has played in the contributors' individual lives, along with fan memories of the Dark Shadows festivals, interactions with the Dark Shadows cast and crew, rare vintage studio days photos, artwork, fan fiction. Oh my goodness, lots of great stuff in here. The book will be printed in full color and only available for purchase directly from Bob Issel, and it will be $27 plus postage, which is a savings of nearly $8 off the retail price, which will be $34.95. No money will be collected prior to the book being released. At this time, Bob is just asking for pre-orders, so if you're a Dark Shadows fan and you want Our Shadowed Past Volume 2, you can get a nice deal on it there. There's going to be a limited print run of 200 books, so please email Bob to reserve your copy or copies as soon as you can, and the email is bobubas, BOBUBAS 59@gmail.com. I know that Bob worked very hard on this, and so did Jeff Kenny. I know Jeff's been doing a lot of work with layout and restoring photographs. He sent me a restored photograph that I had sent in from like the early 70s, mid 70s, and it's gorgeous. It looks like a brand new picture. I just couldn't believe how vivid it was. I know they've been working very hard on this. Rod Lavi has contributed an exclusive interview he conducted with Lara Parker. There's another wonderful feature in the book called I Was a Teenage Dark Shadows Fan Club President, and it's been penned by Rod Lavi with contributions from fellow Studio Days fan club presidents Dee Kearney, Paulette Nordman, and Kathy Hardawich. The cover of the book has been unveiled. Cindy Yates did the cover, and she's known for her amazing Dark Shadows jewelry as well. Really great cover for Volume 2. If you want to pre-order a copy, you want to contact bobubas59@gmail.com. And now, with all of that said, let's get to the show. For those watching the YouTube version of this episode, I just want to apologize for the dark shadow across my face. I should have adjusted the lights before I started recording, but the pop blocker in front of my microphone was casting a little bit of a shadow, so I do apologize for that. I'll have to keep an eye on that in the future. place to hide. This podcast is fun, but there are spoilers inside. Welcome to Terror at Collinwood. I am your hostess, Danielle, aka Penny Dreadful, and I am delighted and honored because returning to the podcast is the one and only Kathryn Leigh Scott, a recipient of the prestigious Life Career Saturn Award from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films. Kathryn has appeared in countless stage, television, and film productions and has written a number of successful books. She is, of course, beloved by Dark Shadows fans for her portrayals of Maggie Evans, Josette Dupre, and several other characters in the series. I want to welcome you back, Kathryn. It's so good to have you back on the podcast again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Danielle. And I want to thank you for coming to Lyndhurst. We had our wonderful gathering, around Halloween, and it was just lovely to see you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was lovely to see you too, and to meet you in person, and Marie Wallace as well. I was going to bring that up. You hadn't been on the podcast in a couple of years. We talked about the Christmas Carol event, very
Right.
wonderful event. But then, yeah, I went down to Lyndhurst and saw you and Marie there, and what a great time I had. Because
Wonderful. We had a wonderful turnout, and I always enjoy those. It's of course a charitable event to raise money for Lyndhurst,
yeah,
but it also has such special meaning for Dark Shadows fans. And one thing that I feel so bad about, Danielle, the day that you came, Christian Cooper was there, and he had mentioned some time earlier that Sybil Weinberger was a friend of his.
oh,
He brought her. She was there. She was sitting right behind where you were sitting, in the next row, next to Christian. And I didn't recognize her. I haven't seen her. Oh, well, since, I haven't seen her in 50 years. I haven't seen
yeah,
her since the show went off the air. And I was always so fond of her. And she was there. Not only that, she took a photograph of Christian and me. And if I had realized it, of course, I would have loved to have had a photograph with Sybil because, we always
oh,
talk about how important Robert Cobert's music was to Dark Shadows. It was like another character in the show, but we
oh,
couldn't have
yes,
done it without that very evocative music. But it was Sybil who was the music supervisor, who was in the booth, who made it all happen.
yeah.
And there's such stories to tell. And I would have introduced her, people could have asked questions. And what I'm hoping is that one day you have her on your show.
I would love to interview Sybil Weinberger. I know Guy Haynes has been in touch with her, and he wanted to interview her as well at one point. I would love to chat with her. She was married to Bob Costello as well, and she was such an integral part of the series, as you point out. I had no idea she was there. I don't. She's kind of shy. I don't know what she looks like, so
Can
I
you
would.
imagine? I was just devastated afterward, and I got in touch with Christian, and I said, I wish you had said something. I mean, I was standing right next to her, and I didn't recognize her. And I'm usually, pretty good at remembering people.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm very good at remembering people, so I feel especially bad. But well, obviously, you can find her through Guy Haynes, but also. Perhaps I could even find her for you through Christian. I would love to meet her for lunch one day
Yeah.
and and catch up. She lives somewhere in the New York area.
I see. Okay. If she's ever willing to do it, the door is open. I would be more than happy to have her on the
Well,
podcast.
maybe she'll even watch this podcast
Yeah.
and
Uh,
ask to be on. That would be great.
um, before we look at the past a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the future because I call you the Dark Shadows Dynamo because you are always on the go. You're always doing all of these interesting things, convention appearances. You're still working in film. You're in Ansel's upcoming film, The Great Nick D, which I'd like to talk a little bit about. I don't know how much you can share. I know Ansel's going to be coming onto the podcast in March, I think, to talk about the film.
Good.
And Stuart Manning over in the Dark Shadows news page just posted about this Dark Shadows Remembrance event that's coming up this summer in Los Angeles. So can you tell us a little bit about some of what you have coming up?
Oh dear. Well, well, a couple of things I should mention. I don't think that I'll be doing Lyndhurst this year. Um,
Oh, okay.
October is a very busy month for them, and I think it's going to be a busy month for me. So they suggested doing it in July. However, I think that we are going to be having a memorial for Laura Parker in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I don't know the venue or the date, but it'll be sometime in the last week of June and possibly the first week of July, maybe around the 6th or the 7th. But, everybody is going to want to be there and to schedule time away and make travel arrangements and everything. I think it's too much to expect that people can be at something in Los Angeles and then weeks later be at something on the East Coast. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to put it off for this year. And that's not been announced yet, so you're the first to know.
Okay.
But we'll soon have a date for that. And I've seen Ansel's film. It's wonderful. We will talk about that. Uh,
Great.
and I'm working on a couple of projects. One of them, I got the rights back to The Bunny Years, a documentary that I made
Okay.
uh, quite a few years ago based on my book, The Bunny Years. But
Yeah.
I would say that perhaps a third of the people that are in that documentary have already passed away,
Um,
including Hef and his brother Keith and many of the young women who worked as bunnies. But I got the rights back from A&E and BBC One and Canadian TV, and my producing partner on that is Stuart Goodman.
okay.
And Stuart was the number one cameraman on the
Yeah.
original Dark Shadows,
Yeah.
and we produced the original Bunny Years, and so we're now producing the reissue. So
Okay.
I'm adding a little bit more material to what we have, re-editing, adding new music,
Mm.
and that's a big project. Again, a huge learning curve for me. I've produced before, but to be in this editing process is new.
Mm.
And yes, a couple of really nice projects that I'm looking forward to.
Great. Is that going to be available via streaming, or are you doing like a Blu-ray
It'll be
release or?
it'll be um, it'll be streaming,
Great.
and there are a couple of really lovely surprises with that, which I can't talk about yet, but I'm
Okay.
excited about it.
Oh,
Uh,
wonderful.
yeah, so I'm
Yes.
that's another thing that I'm working on, and um, yes, a few things. I wrote a piece for Stuart's new. It's a fanzine, a magazine.
Yeah. The
What he's
daytime gothic. Yes. Yeah.
Daytime Gothic. I wrote a piece on really on Laura Parker, and
Yeah.
I knew we were going to be talking about Laura. I miss
Yes.
her very much.
Yeah.
Can't tell you. And so I wrote a piece for that, and I'm glad that I had the time to work on that when I did because it made it even more meaningful and poignant.
Yeah. Stuart, I had Stuart on a few months ago, and he had mentioned off mic, off without this was happening. So I'm excited about that, and I know fans are going to be really happy to see that.
There are some really wonderful people. But, you've talked to most of them now on your show, or your podcast. Ansel, of course, and Darren Gross. Uh,
Yeah.
he's such an integral part of the whole story of Dark Shadows, especially with his work on Night of Dark Shadows.
Yes.
And Stuart Manning. You should also, I hope, one day talk with Patrick McRae. Have you
Oh,
already?
oh, yeah. Patrick has the record for the most appearances on this pod. He's been on five episodes.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
he's so talented, and so Patrick and I are we work on various things together.
Mhm.
So I'm really impressed by all of the guests that you have on this podcast. It's you're doing a wonderful job of keeping everybody aware of Dark Shadows and what's happening, and keeping the legacy going, along with the other people that we've just talked
Well,
about. So,
well, thank you, and especially you. You have been over the years just instrumental you in keeping Dark Shadows in the zeitgeist, but through your books and just your appearances, and you just recently did the readings for all of those Ross novels. Like that must have
that
been quite the undertaking.
That was wonderful. I
Mm,
really loved doing that, and I did those during COVID. So I, what I really loved is working at this little studio in Soho,
mm,
recording studio, and nobody else was there. So every day when I came in, everything was right there where I'd left it the day before.
mm,
And I found that I could work maybe 5 hours at a time reading,
yeah,
and I just loved it. I was totally immersed in this world that Ross had created,
yeah,
which is very close to what Art Wallace originally created with his
yeah,
Bible for Dark Shadows. And I think a lot of these books were written before Dark Shadows had really taken off.
yeah.
Um, so the stories are very different, and there are a couple of plot lines that I wish that Dan had really considered, for not that
Sure.
not that we didn't come up with some very interesting plot lines borrowing on, Turn of the Screw and Picture of Dorian Gray and all the things that we did do, but
Mm.
some of these Marilyn Ross plot lines were really interesting.
Yeah, so some very creative ideas for
Oh,
sure, and there were so many of them, and it's just remarkable that Dan Ross was able to write that many book, and that was only one of the things he was writing tons of these,
right.
Gothic novels and things. He was very prolific. Um,
Incredibly prolific, amazing.
yes,
And the other
yes,
thing I should mention, I'm very close to David Selby too.
yes. Oh, he's
And
wonderful.
David and I are working with our mutual pal, Susan Sullivan, who's one of my very oldest friends. We met
Yeah,
as Playboy Bunnies on
yeah.
as a matter of fact, on a rainy Sunday in February,
Hmm.
96, but 2 years before I was on Dark Shadow, a year before I was
Yeah,
years before I was on Dark
yeah.
Shadows.
And you
So
got her on Dark Shadows as a
got
ghost,
her
right?
on
Yeah.
Dark Shadows. She came to visit me at the studio, and we went up to the Brittany du Soir and had dinner,
Hmm.
and Dan was there, and I introduced them, and he was looking for somebody to play the ghost
Hmm.
on one of the episodes, and Susan came on board to play a ghost. I mean, I
Yeah.
hear about that all the time.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know. Yeah, Susan Sullivan was
Yeah,
on
I know.
one episode of Dark Shadows as a ghost. Yeah.
But Susan and we're all intertwined because
Hmm.
but Selby was on Falcon Crest with her, and Mitch Ryan did a series with her. But then
Yeah,
Mitch and David from Dark Shadows. So the four
sure.
of us are really tight. We always have been,
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah,
especially close to Mitch. So
yeah.
we've been doing several of these little Zoom smartphone theater, we call.
Yes, yeah.
uh, this is I think it's our fifth one. Of course, David and I we also did the Gift of the Magi
Yeah,
together.
yes, yeah. And these are wonderful. I will put a link in the show notes so that people can, if you haven't watched these performances, they are archived on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them, and they're fantastic. The first one Mitch was in with was you, David, Mitch Ryan, and Susan Sullivan together. And Susan Sullivan wrote that play for Zoom, I believe.
She wrote that one, yes. And I
Yes,
should
yeah.
also mention that David and I go way back, even when we were doing Dark Shadows.
Hmm.
We did Miss Julie at the Actors Studio. I
Oh,
think
wow.
that was I think it was Mitch Ryan who suggested that we do that,
Okay.
and we came in as guests, and
Mhm.
we did Miss Julie, and it was for his name just went out of my mind. Head of of the Actors Studio. Anyway, it
Oh,
was an incredible experience because of who was sitting out there
yeah,
in this master class, watching it.
yeah,
And of course, David and I were just, I mean, we were kids. We were just starting
mhm,
out.
yeah.
I think the second year of Dark Shadows. So,
I w
uh, but
I
that
want
was fun. I mean, that was really fun to do.
yeah, oh, I'm sure I can imagine. Oh my goodness. I wanted to ask you about this because you grew up in, was it Robbinsdale, Minnesota, in on a farm, right?
Yeah, on a farm in Robbinsdale, Minnesota, and then
Yeah,
I was around 12 years old. We moved. what, a couple of blocks away off the farm.
Yeah.
My dad's farm is now, a sprawling, it's a big, housing development,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
back then, it was the most wonderful idyllic childhood. I've
Yeah.
written about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every kid in the neighborhood wanted to work on my dad's farm. He loved children,
Hmm.
and he employed everybody.
Yeah.
So that was fun. And then we had a hill for, tobogganing and
Hmm.
sledding in the winter. And the fire department would come over and create an ice pond in the winter.
Yeah.
We had a woods that we played in, and there was an old stone cottage ruin, and of course we imagined that this wicked witch lived in it. And we did all kinds of plays, and we did all sorts of little pageants and productions,
Wow.
piling up the cabbage crates and creating a stage. I
Yeah.
mean, it was wonderful.
Yeah.
Uh, we had such freedom. I don't know if kids can do that now.
Yeah.
I mean, we would work on the farm. We actually really did work on the farm, and
Hmm.
I loved going to market with my father and early in the morning. We grew vegetables, for retail markets and
Yeah.
restaurants and so on. And we also, raspberries and apples and rhubarb and
Yeah.
kind of vegetable you can think of. It was really lovely. But also, you could get on your bike in the morning and be gone the whole day and nobody worried about you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I hope kids can do that because you grow up with such a sense of personal security, inner
Right.
security.
It,
You know,
it's
know you,
part of childhood
know you
that,
can take care of yourself.
yeah, and kids miss, I think kids are missing out on, and parents can be very overprotective but it's because of what they hear about, these things that happen. It's scary. I'm sure there are places where that kind of thing still happens. At least I hope so, because that just sounds wonderful. Was your dad was from Norway?
Yes, my dad's Norwegian, and my
Wow.
mother was bilingual. I mean, her whole
Uh-huh.
family was Norwegian, and that was my first language.
Yeah.
We lived there. We were on the first passenger ship back to Norway.
Mm,
My mother knew how much my father wanted to go back. His father had died during the war, and of course Norway was occupied. Um, I get emotional when I think about it because
mm,
it was such I was a toddler, but you have your very earliest memories when, something momentous happens in your young life. And
mm,
there's such a lot of that I do remember. The trip over was momentous. And of course, I was with all of my cousins. We were all around the same age.
mm.
And that was just wonderful. I'm still close to them,
Yeah.
uh, but we spent a year there, and my father had a farm, and
Mm,
that's why we were allowed to be on that first passenger ship back. As a matter of fact, it was a passenger ship that had been converted to a troop ship during the war, so it was really pretty primitive. And you wonder how your parents manage this. But anyway, my mother was bilingual, so she had no problem, going back. And Norway was war torn. We went back with a trunk full of sugar, butter, flour, fabrics, uh, and I don't know, dozens of pairs of brown Oxfords for every cousin in the family. And I remember, again, we were just little, and I remember taking the shoestrings and we had to fray them on the edge of the steps,
yeah.
uh, so and scuff the shoes up a little bit so that they would look worn, although they were brand new, and so we could, bring them back into Norway.
I
Uh,
see.
but it was an amazing time, and it's incredible that I should remember so much of
Yeah.
it.
I love hearing about this because my parents are from the Azores Islands of Portugal, and I'm first generation American, so I Portuguese was my first language. My both of my parents also spoke English. They learned English when they came to America, so they taught me both languages, but I had a little Portuguese accent when I was little, and but it was a very agrarian society, and we also send barrels of stuff to our
Yeah.
cousins there. We're still very close to our family, Portuguese family members, and where I grew up, there's a very tight Portuguese community. I don't know if there a Norwegian community in Robbinsdale?
Are you kidding? I think where I grew up in Minneapolis, I think it was a suburb of Oslo. It was. But my dad was such an interesting fellow. Um, he was a farmer, but he also wrote a humor column for 5 Norwegian newspapers.
Mhm.
And he was a very funny man. And my parents met doing amateur theatricals and in Minneapolis. And they danced with a Norwegian folk dancing group.
Mhm.
And my father knew such interesting people. I remember Carl Sandburg came to Robbinsdale actually to dedicate a school, a Carl Sandburg school, and I was on the school newspaper, and I was assigned to cover him. And I remember uh, my father saying, "Yeah, you should put on that red suit you made." I made a red suit in home ec class, and so you'll stand out. And he said, "And say hello to him from me." My father knew Carl Sandburg from the Five Corners downtown Minneapolis,
Oh, wow.
which was very much an immigrant area.
Mhm.
And all of these amazing, Vachel Lindsay, all these people, came through. I mean, it was a very bohemian crowd. And Brenda Euland, whom you wouldn't know, but she was a writer, and she happened to be there, and I think recognized my name, and which was an unusual name, and knew my dad, and Carl Sandburg saw me there, along with all of these, the Minneapolis Star Tribune and the Chicago Tribune and the Fargo Moorhead News. All of these people were there, and of course I was there in my little red suit. And Carl Sandburg called me up, and I had my steno pad with my little notes written out, and I interviewed him in front of all of these people,
Oh,
asking my questions one by one, writing them out. Anyway, I won a state journalism award for the piece that I wrote,
uh-huh.
which made me feel like a writer at what, 15, almost 16 years old.
Mhm.
It was an incredible experience, but to be able to interview somebody like that, and I'd read all of his, I really boned up before this interview.
Sure.
It was an extraordinary experience. And you imagine something like that happening to a farm girl in Robbinsdale, Minnesota. Those things are
It's
life,
thrilling, it's thrilling. Oh, it must
well, they're
yeah.
life changing.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. And I mean, it just blows my mind when I think about this. And you're so inspiring because you really are. Honestly, you went from growing up in this small farm community and you left to go to college in Illinois, I think it was, and then you
Oh,
went
how if only.
yeah,
Well, yes, when I
yeah,
was 16, and this
yeah,
too was life changing.
yeah,
Uh, well, I'd won a state award for a well, a soliloquy I'd done for this acting thing.
yeah,
And thanks to my speech and drama teacher in school, she helped me to apply to Northwestern University.
yeah,
And I was accepted in their cherub program. I was 16 years old. I was given a scholarship, and that actually covered my train ride to Evanston. And that summer was life changing for a 16-year-old, meeting 16-year-old kids from all over the United States, and sitting around but talking about Chekhov and Strindberg
yeah.
and Shakespeare. And I remember sitting under the tree on the campus and with all these other kids and talking about, um, life, and,
Yeah.
who are we and what, all of
Sure.
those kinds of things that, young kids, feel like nobody has ever talked about those things before. But anyway, it was life changing, and then I was given a partial scholarship to come back for university, but it was nowhere near enough. Northwestern was very expensive, and living in Evanston, it wasn't something that was going to happen. But I was heartbroken that I wouldn't be able to go to college there, and I didn't want to go back for my senior year of high school. So I I um, I um, I had this plan, and I was going to somehow get in touch with my local bank. This is before Venmo. This is before anything
Sure.
else.
Yeah.
My hands on my savings from my bank, and I was going to take the bus from Chicago to Florida, and then find a way to get to Cuba because there was a revolution going on.
Yeah.
And I figured I could harvest sugar cane, and I knew how to drive a tractor. And so I wanted anything but to go back to Robbinsdale.
Yeah.
And my parents got wind of it, and they drove to Evanston and hauled me back. So I think I spent my senior year in high school sort of in mourning for my life.
Oh.
But I did end up going to a college in Minnesota with a wonderful theater department.
Hmm.
And the theater department actually had their own summer theater, and they hired real live New York actors. And that summer, again, a fluke, but one of the real live New York actors said, "So what are you doing here? Do you want to act or do you want to teach?" And I said, "I want to act." And he told me about the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I didn't know such places existed. And I applied, and I got a scholarship, I think because of Northwestern and everything. And next thing I knew, I was on my way to New York.
Yeah.
I Again, a couple
But
of life-changing experiences,
yes.
flukes really.
But
And
it's so inspiring that you did that. I mean, and you pursued your dreams. You went to, I mean, that must have been both exhilarating and terrifying to go
it
to
was
New
culture
York
shock.
at what, 19 years old were you at the time?
But not quite. Yeah, not quite. Anyway, yeah, because yeah, such
18.
a lot happened.
That's so, I
A
mean,
lot
it's
happened in that tiny little period
mm,
of time. And
mhm,
then, well, I needed money to live on.
mhm,
And, and so I saw that ad in the New York Times, girls step into the spotlight, be a Playboy bunny.
mhm,
And so I applied, and I got a job as a Playboy bunny to
yeah,
pay room and board. But
mhm,
the women that I met, the young women that I got to meet, um, just an amazing group of women. Many of them are still my friends. It's why I wrote the book. I was in bunny training with Gloria Steinem. There were only six of us in bunny training,
mhm,
and she was a lot older. But we had dinner together
mhm.
and spent time together.
And you were doing this while you were a bunny while
The
you
American
while
Academy.
you were at the
She
American
went to school.
Academy.
And
Yeah.
that's the thing. I mean, Gloria knew, that I had a scholarship, that I was going to school.
Mhm.
She knew I was working as a Playboy bunny. None of that was in her idiotic article that she wrote. And it was so offensive to all of us who were, 18, 19 years old, very ambitious. And then to read about us in such a disparaging and marginalizing way. And uh, I don't know why but it had that too had a big effect on me. It
Yeah.
really angered me.
Yeah.
And then about 15, 20 years later, I ran into her, and I had just done a book. She had just written her biography of the Revolution Within, and we bumped into each other at a book party in New York, and and chatted, and 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 she thought she, I think, knew me, and I said, "No, no, you wouldn't remember me. We were in bunny training together." Anyway, I thought, this woman still doesn't get it.
Yeah.
That's was my opinion. Anyway, that's why I wrote the book, and I'm so glad that I did because I reunited with a lot of the women that I had worked with, and just doing the research for that book,
Mhm,
and um, and just and it awakened a lot of the things that I so cared about when I was young,
mhm,
uh, and and made me think about so many things,
yeah,
uh, values,
mhm,
and so on.
yeah,
And I'm really glad that I wrote the book.
yeah, and you shed light on something that most people don't know a lot about, and you
Well, she
mhm,
had written what I did not want what she had written to be the gospel of the way things
yes.
are.
Yeah,
Because she wrote about us, and what I wanted to do was to give voice to the women that I had worked with and their experiences.
yeah,
And that's what the book was.
mhm,
So, yeah, that was one of those self-learning experiences.
yeah. What was the American Academy of Dramatic Arts like? Because I have to tell you, I auditioned for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts when I was younger, and I got it. I got in, but I didn't go. I didn't have a scholarship, and I didn't have enough financial aid to go there. I auditioned in New York for the LA American Academy, but I ended up going to San Francisco State University instead to their theater program. Ultimately, I'm glad I did because I met my late husband in San Francisco, and I wouldn't have met him if I hadn't gone to San Francisco. But I often think about what it would have been like to have gone. You can't look back and be like, "Oh, did I make the right choice?" I did. I met my husband, but I wonder what it would have been like to go to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. How was that experience?
Well, it was wonderful, but
Mm.
are we the same person, Danielle?
Uh,
Share quite a few experiences. Yeah.
Yes, well, yeah.
Yes,
Well, you,
sure you were heartbroken. I know what it was like not
mm,
being able to go to Northwestern. So, but then I have to say, what if?
mm,
What if I had stayed in college in Minnesota and become a
mm,
teacher? What if I had gone to Cuba? There are so many what ifs.
sure.
If I'd gone to Northwestern, I would have led a very different life. So would you.
Mm,
And I wouldn't change a thing. The
yeah,
people that I met, the experiences that I had, and for you to meet your husband, and you know, no,
yeah.
yeah.
I wouldn't have met him if I hadn't gone to San
What's
Francisco. So
I think
I.
the story is you can't look back. The American Academy was a terrific experience.
Mm,
Again, is thrown in with all of these young people my age,
mm,
uh, and working with some really wonderful teachers. As a matter of fact, Harry Master George, who was my teacher at the American Academy, after my husband passed away and I really needed to shake myself up and uh, and get back into acting and work and I sought Harry out and I started studying with him again. He was in his
oh,
80s. He was in his
that's
80s.
so cool. Oh, that's
I went back and studied with him,
yeah,
and I'm so glad that I did. He was a remarkable teacher,
yeah.
and I studied with Wyndham and with Uta Hagen. I worked with the Berghoff Foundation. Herbert Berghoff started a little repertory unit. I worked with him. I had the extraordinary privilege of working with Paul Draper, who was a dancer and one of the blacklisted. And we did three little plays together, original plays that Herbert Berghoff directed. And I worked with Uta Hagen in a play that Saul Bellow wrote based on one of his books. So these were amazing experiences that happened because I went to the American Academy, and then because of people that I met there ended up at the Berghoff Foundation. So that 2 years that I spent working as a Playboy bunny
Yeah.
until 1 o'clock, and then, jumping into a taxi and putting on my false eyelashes
Yeah.
and racing in and working the cocktail
Yeah.
shift at the Playboy Club. I mean, two
Wow.
very different
Yeah,
worlds.
yeah. Did you get
Uh,
homesick at all?
no, I
No,
didn't. I
you
didn't get
didn't. No.
sick. No, no, no. I'm so close to my family.
Yeah.
But being homesick, no, I
Yeah.
was just, I was thrilled with every every day.
That's
And
crazy.
and again, the American Academy was amazing because you were working with all of these people like Paul Curtis, who founded the American Mime Company Theater, and I studied with him. Later, when I got to know Marcel Marceau,
Yes. Yeah.
that was it was amazing because I had already studied mime and I had some background in that, and so many of the teachers, Max Fisher and isn't that funny? I can remember all of their names.
Mhm.
Frances Fuller was head of it. Worthington Miner was her husband, and he directed me in the first play written in the United States. It was a restoration comedy called The Contrast, and I did it in the first season of the Eugene O'Neill Festival. And unfortunately, I didn't get to open there because um, uh, Peter Miner, Worthington Miner's son, was working with Dan Curtis, and I had auditioned several times for Dark Shadows. And one day Peter said, because anyway, too long a story, but the truth of the thing is, I thought I could do both, and but we started rehearsals for Dark Shadows, and that was the end of that.
Right. Right.
But again, it was just a lot of experiences crammed into a very brief and wonderful time in my
Oh,
life.
how exciting. Just New York in the 60s, just the theater scene in New York in the 60s just sounded so electrifying and just reading about it, it just seems like it was such an amazing creative time with all of these artistic people doing all kinds of interesting things. And you
Oh,
were at the heart of that. That's really cool.
yes, I was, but I have to tell you, Danielle, when you're in New York, I mean, it doesn't matter. People will always tell you, well, if you'd been here in Greenwich Village 10 years ago, or, uh, um,
Oh, right. Yeah, it was better then.
was extraordinary because there was Cafe Chino and all of these wonderful uh, theaters.
Yeah.
These little coffee house theaters, Cafe La Mama, and oh, so many of them. And then when I got to London, Sam Shepard, who'd been doing that off Broadway, off Broadway, he was doing lunchtime theater in London when I got there.
Mhm.
Uh, it was an exciting time. And it was sort of bohemian,
Yeah.
sort of a lot of things,
Yeah.
but it was very fresh and alive.
I don't know how these young actors now can go to New York to live. I mean, they must live like 10 to an apartment because it's so expensive to live
My
in.
apartment in New York was $59 a month, and it was a garden apartment on in the mid 50 near Sutton Place,
Mhm.
near the river. Yeah, $59 a month.
Yeah.
And well, of course, I was a Playboy bunny, so I could afford to go to Bendel's
Yeah.
and all those kinds of places. But no, I don't know how they do it, and even though there are so many more platforms and it seems like so many things available to kids now, it feels more limiting than it did.
Yeah. I mean, they find ways to do it, but I think it's just as groups, they go with other people and they all go in on one small apartment and they make it work because people are still doing it, but it must be quite the challenge. I didn't realize that you had auditioned for Dark Shadows several times, you said. So it was
I did. Oh,
wow.
yes. I did. I auditioned quite a few times, but it was really interesting because the Dan's office was up on Madison Avenue.
Mhm.
And I remember Louis Edmonds and Nancy Barrett were both there at one of the times that I was there auditioning. And then Eleanor Kilgallen, Dorothy Kilgallen's sister, by the way, was running the whatever that program was at Universal, and I was sent out to do a screen test for one of those Universal contracts, and the night after I did it, and I was there, my agent got in touch and said that I had to come back right away on a red eye and do a camera test for Dark Shadows. And I flew back, and the script was on my in front of my door. That's how you did things in those days. My agent literally dropped it off in front of my door, and um, and I auditioned that morning with Mitch Ryan and you would know Chick Madden. I knew him because he'd been a room director at the Playboy Club, but the two and they were both actors, studio actors. And I auditioned with both of them, but nobody else was auditioning for Maggie Evans. So I figured I had the role. And then afterward, we went to Joe Allen and we sat at the bar having breakfast together. And I thought, which of these guys is going to play Burke Devlin? I had no idea. I had no idea until the first day of rehearsal, and there was Mitch Ryan standing.
Yay.
So then I knew. And my God,
Oh,
he's he's just one of my favorites.
yeah,
Um, I was very, very close to Joel Crothers and Mitch Ryan. I think I was closer to them than anybody. And uh, they were there that first year,
yeah,
and then sadly Mitch,
yeah.
left the show, and that was a sad occasion.
Yeah, it was, I just had John Logan on the podcast, and we were talking about how Dark Shadows lost something special when Mitch
Oh,
left.
he
Yeah,
was uh, he was remarkable.
yeah.
So he was a wonderful actor. But I wrote I wrote a book called Dark Passages where I kind of turned everything on its ear, and I one of the characters is based on Mitch, and there was something about him that was larger than life. He was just yummy.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say.
He was very,
We had a
charismatic.
he was, and we had a something happened with us that was a life. I won't talk about it, but it was uh, a lifelong bonding experience up
Yeah.
until, and I saw him shortly before he died. I wrote about him, the piece that I wrote
Daytime Gothic.
oh, you've read it, Stuart
Yeah,
Mann.
yeah.
Uh, I wrote a piece. I went to see Mitch right before he died, and he was reading John Dos Passos, and we had this wonderful conversation, and I, and then we had a private moment where we talked about what happened. Um, oh, yeah, yeah. Um, he was just very important in my life, and very important to me as a young actor. Uh, just working with him, I learned such a lot. It was the first time I was on camera, and not that he was that much more experienced, but there was something about him that just gave you a sense of being solid on your pins. Just, I can't describe it, but you work with certain actors, and you just feel solid with them.
Yeah.
And the fact that we had so many of those scenes in the early days, and together. And Joel was the same way.
He was wonderful too, yeah.
Joel was the same way. He gave me that same feeling.
Mm.
Later, I found it with Johnny Carlin.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And to some extent with Jonathan Frid.
Yeah.
We had the oddest relationship. Very, very close, very close. And a remarkable kind of trust between us. Um, and we didn't socialize that much together, although we had dinner, but he was always there for me. When I wrote my first book, he actually flew out and did a book signing with me. Uh, there were 700 people standing in line outside of Walden Books. Uh, he was always there for me.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, we were just very close.
It sounds like there was a very special bond with that group of actors in that show. It's clear when seeing interviews with all of you on stage together and stuff that there's there's a familial kind of feeling there.
Yeah, I think there's some reasons for that.
Mhm,
One, we had our own little studio.
mhm.
We had our own little family unit. And then when I played Josette, which was the first time one of us had a chance to play, multiple characters.
Yeah.
And we started functioning more like a repertory unit, going this way and that way in time and parallel time and playing lots of different characters. There was a cohesive thing that really happened then, and that was in that at the end of that first year. And uh, there were other reasons too. Some of it had to do with Dan Curtis, who would who was really larger than life, who would organize these dinners, and he just had I he had a way of even when we did the first film, he got us all together. We had to raise money for it. I remember he took me and a couple of the other, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Jonathan Frid, but he took a couple of us up to meet Joe Levine. We had no idea who Joe Levine was, and took us up to his office and said, these are my people." And, we we were his dancing bears. We were his little pony show, and but that kind of added to that kind of Andy Hardy feeling. Kids, we're gonna put on a show.
Sure.
But I think that was also part of it, and the fact that we were this amazing mix of old and young.
Mhm.
We were the young ones. Not to say that David Hennessy, who is the most experienced of all of us,
Yes.
theater background, but we were the young ones. But
Yeah.
then to be working with people like Thayer David and Clarice Blackburn and Joan Bennett,
Sure.
uh, Humbert Estrado.
Yeah.
um,
Louis Edmonds.
yeah, oh, and Lewis Edmonds. To be
Mhm,
working with those people, uh, yeah, and to be working with Leela Swift, who came out of live TV.
mhm,
And the other thing, the big important element is that we were live.
mhm.
So it was like working in summer stock, except we didn't have that luxury of a full week. Um, we put a show together in one day. We came in raw in the morning at 8, and by 3:30 we were performing
Yeah.
live, and you couldn't make a mistake, you couldn't flub. And it's not just the actors that couldn't, it was the crew. No, the camera crew couldn't flub. The TD and all the people in the booth, they couldn't
Mhm,
flub.
mhm.
So that's another, we really depended on each other.
Yeah.
um, so I think that was another reason for building up that family unit.
Sure. And you all came out of the theater. I mean, these were all everybody seemed to have some background in theater, whether you're young actors or more mature actors. And I could imagine that that would also be a unifying factor there with all of the cast members.
Yeah, it was. It was. Yeah, all of us had theater experience. Certainly
Yeah.
Joel did, and he did Barefoot in the Park while we were doing Dark Shadows. Mitch Ryan did. I want to say Murder in the Dark. Anyway, anyway, he was doing theater, and I went off to do theater, and I worked with Michael Shirtliff off Broadway. I did the Berghoff things, uh, so I was doing a bit of theater. Everybody
Yeah.
was.
You have mentioned a few times that when Dark Shadows shifted from into the supernatural, when Dan Curtis decided you're going to go supernatural with Dark Shadows, you mentioned some of the people involved with the show weren't thrilled about that. Like, I'd read somewhere that Leela Swift was one of them, but I don't know if that's just hearsay from fans. I don't know. Do you remember who
Oh, I remember
wasn't?
that. Yes, and I've written about it. So yeah, I can kind of download what I remember from when I wrote it. We remember what was his name? Paul Schofield. He played
Oh,
the
Bill Malloy. Bill
Bill.
Malloy when he was the ghost. Yeah.
Yeah, and and that was the thing that put Leela Swift over the edge.
Oh, so it was Leela who was not thrilled about the supernatural
Well,
stuff.
no, no, no. It's not that she wasn't thrilled about it, but she wasn't sure that Dan Curtis was aware that not only, could who was it? Uh, Sarah,
Oh,
uh,
Sharon Smith.
yeah, see the ghost, and that and Malloy, but the audience could, and she said, "We've crossed the line. We're now doing a ghost story."
Oh, it was when Victoria Winters
Oh
was
yeah,
Alexandra was seeing
that's
Bill
right.
Malloy. Yeah, yes.
And when that happened, that's when Leela called Dan on it and just said, "You realize we're now doing a ghost story." And I think Dan was pretty much aware of that because I think his dream started out with a ghost story. So I think that was always there in his mind. Um, but when that happened, that's when the big shift happened. And then I was there the day that Jonathan Frid first appeared. And, Jonathan appeared fully formed as that character on day one.
Mhm.
He came on with the wolf's head cape, the cape, the
Yeah.
spiky hair, the ring, and the voice, and that sort of transatlantic kind of
Yeah.
way of speaking, and and I remember a couple of the actors just said, "Oh my gosh, ghoulies and goblins," now we're doing, paranormal. Um, and I think they weren't happy about it, but because before that we were sort of an old-fashioned Gothic bodice ripper.
Yeah.
We were romance. We weren't quite the soap that other shows were doing. I mean, you couldn't confuse us with those.
No.
But we, as soon as we had, vampires and werewolves and witches, and I was there. Dan, I think, had me audition with Diana Malay when they brought her on. And when we started doing those kinds of stories, we were clearly in the world of paranormal.
Mhm.
So, and I think that some were not happy about it, but of course, then the ratings more than made up for it. And Barnabas I mean, that character Barnabas that Jonathan created was just so full and rich,
Yeah.
and uh, and had so many dimensions to it. I mean, he really brought a vulnerability to this bloodlusting character.
Mhm.
And I think everybody came around. We all loved Jonathan.
Oh, sure. I mean, it was the first time ever in any kind of story where you've got a really fully formed character for a vampire. It wasn't just this, you know, undead being killing people. He had a whole backstory and was complex. And Jonathan Frid always would say in the interviews he liked playing between the two poles, playing those shades of gray in that character. And it was really
Right.
fascinating to see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he no, he brought a lot of excitement to the show,
Mhm.
and to say nothing of ratings,
Yeah.
that made a huge difference,
Mhm.
and and for a young actor to be able to utilize everything that you've learned in drama school, uh, that was amazing,
Yeah.
and we kind of made it up as we went along, and watched the veteran actors, saw what they were
Mhm.
doing, and and it felt perfectly
Yeah.
natural. That's
I
what's so that's what's so amazing. It just all felt perfectly natural.
Yeah. And I can see also why maybe some of the people involved would be have some trepidation too, because as the show went on, those characters who were the human characters, I guess, kind of became the victims of these supernatural beings that would come on to the show, and the focus shifted more to what's going on with Barnabas and Julia and whatever in the lab, or all of this, and the human character, like David Ford's character for Sam, your pop, your
Yeah,
your pop in the show, Sam Evans. He was a pretty prominent character early on, but he kind of started to get more and more into the background, I think. So I could see that kind of thing happening with some of the original cast members, but you stayed front and center as the ingenue of the show as it went on. Josette and Maggie and all of this, but some of the people in the show I could see getting frustrated maybe.
No, no, no.
No, no.
I think I need to clarify there. Uh,
Okay.
David Ford was doing 76
Oh,
on,
yes, that's right. Yeah.
and some of the others, uh, they were going off to do other things. Alexandra left the show
Yeah.
because she was having a baby, and uh, no, I don't think. And David Ford did go back in time. Obviously, he played my
Oh,
father in
yes. Yeah.
the Gisette thing. No, there were other reasons why he left the show,
Hmm.
and uh, uh, no, oh, and Clarice, I think. Uh, she was very much a part of our show, but then I think she went off to do something else.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I just wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit about Mitchell Ryan and Jonathan Frid. And the last time I had you on the podcast, you started talking about Joan Bennett, and we got a little derailed because we were also talking about the Christmas Carol. But I wanted to come back to Joan Bennett because you had such nice things to say about her, and I wanted to hear about some of your memories of Joan. And so I'm going to mention some of the cast members that you worked with, and I'd love to hear
Well,
your thoughts.
Joan had four daughters,
Mhm,
and Diana and Stephanie and Mimsy and Shelley. They were all approximately the same age as the
mhm.
four of us: Laura Parker, Alexandra, Nancy Barrett, and me. And she treated us like her daughters, and. And I remember she once took me aside and said and asked me if I really wanted to be dating that person I was seeing, um, because she knew him, and um, and she was very motherly toward all of us, and uh, and very free with unsolicited advice, as a mother is. But I learned things about acting from her that that were just old studio things that she knew as an actress. But more than that, she was in a production company with her husband, Wanger and Fritz Lang, and she was very much she was so organized, and so there were some. But the fact that she had that experience with Wenger and with Fritz Lang, she had uh, mm, she was more than just an actress on Dark Shadows. She brought so much more to it. And then after the show went off the air, Joan and I became even closer. We became girlfriends, and she lived up in Scarsdale. And I used to go up to Scarsdale, take the train up, and I would stay there, and we'd sit up until 2 o'clock in the morning drinking white wine, and she would
Oh.
tell me these amazing stories, which I cannot share, about Hollywood, Hollywood stories that make me blush, really, but they were just wonderful, gossipy stories, and uh, because she loved men, and and uh, and I remember at one point she showed me her screen test for uh, Gone with the Wind, which now you can actually see. I think you can go on YouTube or whatever.
Mhm.
But she happened to have her screen test for Gone with the Wind, but also Paulette Goddard's and a few others.
Wow.
And so she gave me all kinds of wonderful background stories on these other women. Just wonderful stuff. I mean, I will always carry that with me.
Yeah.
And when she passed away, I was heartbroken. And she, um, when I wrote the lobby card books, I asked her if she would write the foreword to to the first lobby card book. Bob Hope wrote the foreword to the second, and you probably know this, you're a writer yourself, but the dirty little secret is very few people ever write their own forewords or introductions. You write them for them. I have now written a foreword for Hef, for Walter Mondale, for Bob Hope, like, because I was, when I was publishing. So I've written a lot of forewords for people. Two people wrote their own. Ginger Rogers wrote her own foreword for the Hollywood at Your Feet book that I published, and Joan Bennett wrote her own for the lobby card book. And not only that, she flew out. I had a big book party at the Hollywood Studio Museum, which I very much tried to promote. I used to have all of my book signings there. It's the old Jesse Lasky studio, and I tried to help raise money for them, and she flew out for that, and so many of her Hollywood friends were there, Cesar Romero and all kinds of amazing fun people. Oh, Jane Withers and May Clark,
Oh,
and
wow.
Janet Leigh,
Yeah,
and I'm trying to think. Anyway, just these wonderful people showed up
yeah,
because of Joan, and it was just an extraordinary party. She was there for me all the time, and I have to say, I was there for her, always there for her. I loved her.
yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. It's
Yeah,
great to hear about this. Fritz Lang visited the studio. He was a fan of the show. I mean,
he was,
obviously he knew
and I
Joan,
was
but he
there
was,
I was there that day, and I met him. And I remember him standing next to Skip, the cameraman. I think he was doing most of Joan's close-ups in the scene, and he took Mel Handelsman aside, who did the lighting. And the next thing you knew, there was a little eye light.
yeah.
So
Oh, great, great.
he wanted Joan well lit,
Yeah,
and he
mhm,
was just lovely. It was amazing to meet
yeah.
him. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I had Don Glut on the podcast a couple of years back, and Don, wrote prolific writer. He wrote a lot for television, and he wrote the novelization of The Empire Strikes Back, and he knew Fari Ackerman. So he said,
Oh,
Fritz,
yes, Forrest
yeah,
Ackerman was fabulous.
yes, yeah. I met him once, so he was a
Oh, I love
wonderful. It
him.
was wonderful to meet him.
Yeah.
And I guess Fritz Lang would go to Ackerman's house and watch Dark Shadows there, apparently. So, according
Oh,
to Don Glut, yeah. So, and he didn't want anybody to bother him while he was watching Dark Shadows. So,
that's wonderful.
you should
Yeah.
ask Don about that because yeah, he told some interesting stories when I had him on too. Um, what about you talked a little about Joel Crothers. You were very close friends as well, right? Outside of
Yeah,
Dark
we
Shadows.
kind of dated for a while, and we were just really close friends. And of course, it was it's the fun story. One day, and I started going out with Time Life photographer Ben Martin,
Yeah.
who was on assignment in Rome. And I remember I happened to mention, because I had 5 days off, and I said that I was taking an Alitalia flight that night to spend time with Ben. And and uh, and around 6 o'clock that night, my doorbell rang. There was Joel with a suitcase and an Alitalia ticket in hand.
Oh,
And those were the days when you actually had to go and buy one at a. Anyway, and we went out to the airport together. And when we boarded, the stewardesses recognized us, and it just said, "Are Joe and Maggie running off together?"
I love it.
And then, of course, Ben was so surprised. He picked us up the next morning as MGB GT, the tiny little car, and stuffed Joel into the back of it, and found him a room at the same hotel we were staying at, the Angleterre. And Joel and I would, sightsee while Ben was working. He was doing a story at the Vatican.
Mhm.
And Joel and I went to visit the Vatican, and I was wearing a mini skirt, and they wouldn't let me in. And so Joel said, he said, "Can't you just unzip your skirt and pull it down?" Because I was wearing a long jacket. So there I was with my skirt hanging on my hips, with the two of us walking to the Basilica.
Aw,
He was so funny. And I just, yeah, I just loved him.
yeah.
Uh, we were just really, really close. And I think I was the first one that he discussed certain personal matters with.
Mhm.
And uh, uh, I think there was just a wonderful trust between us. I think
Yeah.
he felt safe in sharing some things. And uh, yeah,
y- Yeah.
yeah, I was it was so sad when he passed away so young.
Yeah. That's a tragedy. It really, really is. But I always talk about on the podcast, I talk about in Dark Shadows, Joe and Maggie were they were such a sweet couple. It was so sad what happened. They both end up at Wincliffe. Like it
Well, Dan sent me off to Wincliffe, and that was a joke because he thought he asked me to come over to his office, and my contract expired, and I refused to sign a new one, and so I worked another 6 months and did the film without the contract, and um, and then he told me flat out that I was crazy to be leaving to move to Paris, and uh, and so that's why he sent me to Wincliffe.
That's great. I did want to ask you about when you reunited with Dan to do Turn of the Screw in England. What was that like? You played
It
Miss
was,
Jessel in
well,
Turn of the
first of
Screw.
all, unleashing a madman like Dan Curtis on a poor English crew. I will never forget, but we were standing out in this field and we were starting to lose light or whatever was happening. And the AD whispered something in his ear and he turned around and said, "What the fuck is a tea break?" I mean, he was just people just fell on the floor. I mean, he was just larger than
Yeah.
life. And when we were filming that, we were staying in a stately home, and there were just enough bedrooms in this old stately home to accommodate. It was Megs Jenkins, Jimmy Lawrenson, um, Lynn Redgrave,
Yeah.
and what's his name?
I can't
Shoot.
remember the cat.
Yeah, it's gone out of my head.
Me too. I'm just cutting in real quick. Neither one of us could remember. It was John Barron as Mr. Fredericks, and James Lawrenson played Peter Quint.
It was a fabulous experience, but seeing Dan work, and this was his first time working with I think an English crew, and he was
You knew what was coming, but they they were in for a surprise.
he was he was mad. So anyway, I worked with Dan, I guess, about four times after Dark Shadows.
Mhm. He seemed to always, he had the people that he
He had
really
his
liked working with in his repertory company that he would pull back in to do different things. Yeah.
Yeah, he worked with Johnny Carlin several times, and he had a huge fondness for Mitch Ryan. I think it broke his heart that that didn't work out. Um,
Mitch
but
said I remember listening to Mitch Ryan say that Dan Curtis was practically in tears when he had to, when that happened. Yeah. So, I
I was
mean,
there that day. I was
oh,
I was there. I was there. As a matter of fact, we were doing a scene together I was Maggie, and we were doing a scene together in the diner,
yeah,
and uh, and I remember he came. He disappeared. He disappeared uh, around 10 o'clock that morning, which was the time when, some of the guys could slip out and have breakfast, but the rest of us were, with all that hair and whatnot, makeup. And he didn't come back. And Bob Costello was out looking for him, and somebody said, try the barbershop around. I mean, anyway, he found him giving himself a haircut in this barber shop, and he came back with this unbelievable haircut,
yeah.
kind of a mohawk.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember Leela Swift saying, "Can't we put a deer stalker on him?" Something like it's idiotic. And but then he came on and he delivered his lines like Iago, and
Yeah.
And I remember hearing Leela's voice saying, "Okay, that's a wrap. We're back Sunday," and yeah, and that was the end.
Do you
That was
think Mitch was unhappy being on the show at that point?
no,
No,
no, Mitch? No,
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 yeah,
no. Uh, well, he had a drinking
yeah.
problem.
So yeah, I know. Yeah,
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 and no, no, no,
no, yeah.
no. He would have been, I think, very happy to continue.
Mm.
Yeah,
I'm glad he came back for both. He did one of the Big Finish audio plays with you and brought back Burke Devlin, which was really
he
wonderful, and
insisted.
that was great. And you did the Chris. He was able to do the Christmas Carol, and with all of you, and that was
And by the way,
such a special thing.
he wrote a book and
Yes.
very, very open
Mhm.
about the drinking problem. And he
Yeah.
was sober something like 46 years,
Mhm.
47 years when he died.
Yeah.
So he was very open about that. So I
Mhm.
don't mind mentioning it.
Yeah.
Uh, and he was very proud of having made that.
Yes. And continued on and had a great successful career. And he was very open about that. I've heard many interviews with him where he talked about it. So, another one of your cast members, I want to close the podcast because I know you're busy, but I want to talk to you a little bit about Lara Parker. Could you please share some thoughts or memories about Lara?
um, Yes, Laura and I were very close. We worked so often together, not just on Dark Shadows, but then many times afterward with the Big Finish productions and everything else. And um, and then Laura, I remember when she realized that, well, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then in the last year um, she was diagnosed with lung cancer, and we talked quite a bit around that time, and it was the Parkinson's that really got to her,
Yeah.
slowed her down, as she said. Um, anyway, in the last months or so of her life, it was Stuart who said, you two should interview each other, and Laura was all for it, and um, and I thought, yeah, uh, good idea. And so I flew out to LA, and we spent two consecutive Sundays together, and we recorded each other. As I said to Laura, two actresses and writers do not record. So I recorded everything, and we talked for better part of 2 days. I went out there in the morning, and I left in the late afternoon, and um, and I was able to send her a transcript of everything, and we talked about what should be written. I sent her a draft, and then she gave me some notes, and uh, and I'm really glad that we had that opportunity because there's such a lot that happened between two women, two actresses, two writers. We had such a lot in common, as polar opposite as we were, and we really were. And it was Laura's contention that our relationship was largely based on our characters, Josette and Angelique, because that's how we met. And I was in violent disagreement with that. I said so many other things that really made us two very different people. And and she saw kind of a rivalry, which I didn't so much. And so we got to talk about so many things, not just boys in clothes, you know, uh, because she liked digging deep. So we indeed dug deep. But it was also a lot of fun and walks in the garden and she was frail. She was very frail, and sitting out and looking out on those hills in Topanga and watching the sun go down and having lunch together and everything. It was it was a gift to have that kind of time with somebody at that stage in their lives when they are, you know, making peace with the life they've lived. And that's an extraordinary time. I had a bit of that with my mother, but then, that's family. It's quite a different thing when you're with a contemporary and having those kinds of conversations. So again, that's something I'm going to carry with me the rest of my life. Um, that that period of time that I had with Laura.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, I'm honored that she came on to the podcast. I think it might be the last interview she did was here on this podcast, and that was so
Sure.
wonderful talking with her. She was so nice and just curious about me after we ended. She's like, "So what? Tell me about the Penny Dreadful thing. What's that? Oh, what do you? Oh, so you teach college too?" And because she taught college English as well for a while, so we talked a little bit about that. And she was just really just super cool. It was great talking with her, and as it is with you as well. So,
Well, Laura had a sense of legacy,
mm,
and not everybody does, but she
mm,
had a sense of legacy, and I think uh, many of the things that she came, you know, to peace with in her life also had to do with, um, you know, uh, those things that she did in that, especially that last year of her life.
mm,
uh, the things that she wrote and did. And that's another wonderful thing to be a part of, which of course you are. And I'm so glad that she did that. I can't think of a better venue for her to have that kind of conversation.
but so it was certainly it was an honor. It was to celebrate the 55th anniversary of Angelique's first appearance. So I was thrilled that she was up for it, and she recorded. Mary O'Leary talked to her recently, and I know they recorded Laura's last audiobook, the Heiress of Collinwood. She
Yes.
is.
And
Yeah.
also, I took Ansel aside,
Uh-huh.
and so we'll tell you this when you speak with him. But I took Ansel aside and I said, you really need to put Laura in your film.
Yeah.
And I said, isn't there something you could write? And he did. He wrote a wonderful little scene. And now that I've seen the film, we'll ask him about it.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad because the last time that I saw Laura, she was so looking forward to it. And she was already, um, making plans for it. And uh, yeah, she wanted to do that. And of course, that was her last appearance on film.
Yeah.
She was
It's really
very, she was
special
really,
thing. Yeah.
and I'm very glad that Ansel followed through on that. And I think it was important for him too,
Yeah.
because we've been, I think, uh, so much a part of his genesis as a director.
Yeah. He sent me the link to the trailer for it, and it looks wild. It looks like a really fun film. Definitely a different kind of film than what I've seen from him in the past. He tends to do like fantastical kind of spooky
It's a
things,
big,
but this is. Mm,
it's a big advance. Yeah.
yeah, I look forward to seeing it. I look forward to chatting about it on the podcast. I'm also looking forward to this Dark Shadows Remembrance event with the tribute to Lara Parker. And also, I believe the second day is going to be Jonathan Frid's centenary celebration that they're doing. So it looks like it's going to be a at night. I think the Laura's celebration, life celebrations in the evening.
Talking about is there a date for it?
I don't know. I know it's in the summer. I think it's in early July. I think that's when it's happening. But by the time
Perfect.
this episode goes up, I should have more information and I'll put it in the little news segment at the beginning of the episode if I have more info by then. But I think it's going to be in early July, and I
Yeah,
believe it's a
that's
two.
the thing that I was
Mm,
referencing. Yeah.
yeah, and you're gonna be there. I hope. I
Okay.
assume. Good, good, good. Well, Catherine, I want to thank you for joining me. to walk down memory lane and talk a little bit about what's coming up too. It was really exciting and fun to talk to you, and I was so happy to
It's
hear
fun. And I
those.
know that we're talking longer than you imagine, but I'm really glad that we have. It's really lovely.
Well, thank you for taking the time, the extra time to talk to me. And folks, you can check out everything that's going on with Kathryn at kathrynleescott.com, a beautiful website designed by Patrick McRae. As I recall, Patrick is she's just brilliant. I mean, as I look, the website is beautiful. But yes, kathrynleescott.com. You can get books there, photos, and keep up with everything going on with Kathryn. All right, Kathryn, thank you again. Take care, and I hope to see you soon. Maybe in the summer, I'll see you
Oh, yeah.
at the event. So take care. All right.
And for as long as they lived, the dark shadows never truly vanished, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.